was published in the Ecological Monographs, a prestigious publication of the Ecological Society of America. And it is the very first time that anyone tried to justify phenology as being more than a quaint Victorian hobby, to really treat it as serious science. And this paper is really all about showing, through the analysis of the records from the shack and from the arboretum, that there really is order and meaning in these observations, that there are things that ecologists should be paying attention to, which was a remarkable thing to get published at that time. Ecology was still a very young science at that time, and they were very, very concerned that they be taken seriously. And by being taken seriously, one of the things was to distinguish the science of ecology from the study of natural history. And something like phenology was clearly part of natural history. So Leopold's paper was really a groundbreaking paper in saying, no, this is really serious, legitimate science, and it deserves to be considered seriously by ecologists. So Leopold made some important conclusions in that paper. He made the observation that when he compared the average dates of things at the shack versus at the arboretum, that he thought he could see that things happened slightly later at the shack, which is about 40 miles north of Madison, than it did at the arboretum. Particularly, from our point of view now, he also made a correlation with climate. He observed that when we had warm springs, that many events occurred earlier, and when we had colder springs, they occurred later. So he had a full decade of data, full 10 years of data, and he was able to see this pattern very clearly. And also, with respect to our current concern about climate change, he also made the very important note that these year-to-year variations in climate were not responded to the same way by all species of plants and animals. Some responded. When it was a warm spring, they'd occur earlier. Other species seemed not to respond to spring temperatures at all. They occurred regularly at the same date. So these are very important observations, especially the last two, in understanding the consequences of climate change today. And obviously, he made the point, sort of, if you will, an advocacy for phenology, that it really is valuable, especially as you accumulate more data over more years and over a broader geographic area. He also, in the discussion of the paper, pointed out that although phenology can be treated as serious science, it is what statisticians call messy data. There are so many things that can influence when you actually see the first plant blooming or the first bird arriving. And Leopold sort of observed that there were some possibilities for bias in the data. And he said, for example, that the behavior of the observers was important. If you were a casual observer, you were likely to see the event later than somebody who was really serious about it. The number of observers, the more eyes that are out there looking, the more likely that you would find it earlier than if you were alone. The intensity of the observations makes a difference, and by this, Leopold means whether you sort of expected something to happen. If you had prior knowledge of when it was going to happen, you would be likely to see it earlier than if you encountered the event completely cold and had no idea it was coming. The size of the study area. Larger study areas, you might have more topographic variation and things that might lead to an earlier sighting. And finally, one that I'll return to in some detail is the interval between observations. The longer the period of time between when you go out in the field and make observations, likelier than not, you're going to record the event later than it actually occurred. These are all biases. These are all things that mean that the date that you record the event on might not be the date when it actually happened.